My sister auctioned me and my son. Then a stranger raised his hand. The laughter echoed, a wave of cruel, unadulterated mirth washing over the opulent ballroom. And with each resonant peal, a piece of my dignity crumbled, falling like shards of a shattered mirror around my feet. It was Sophie's wedding, a spectacle of grandeur she had meticulously planned, designed not just to celebrate her union, but, it seemed, to underscore every perceived failing of mine. My breath hitched. A choked sob caught in my throat as her voice, amplified by the microphone, cut through the air, sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. And now, for a very special, unexpected item on our agenda, she trilled. Her eyes, identical to my own in their shape but devoid of any warmth, glinting with malicious glee as they locked onto mine. A true family heirloom, if you will. My dear sister, Emily, and her unique little accessory. The spotlight, which moments before had illuminated Sophie and her gleaming white gown, now swung, blinding and merciless, to pin Liam and me where we stood near the ornate fountain. A safe distance, I'd thought, from the main stage. The air crackled with anticipation, a morbid curiosity in the collective gaze of the assembled high society. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, as I instinctively pulled Liam closer, his small hand gripping mine, too tight, his innocent eyes wide with a confusion that mirrored the terror blossoming in my own chest. He was only 7, and already he was learning the bitter taste of public humiliation, served up by his own aunt. "You see," Sophie continued, her voice dripping with mock sincerity, "Emily, bless her heart, has always been a bit of a project, a single mother, struggling, bless her heart, and her adorable son. Liam, well, he's certainly a handful, isn't he?" A ripple of titters ran through the crowd. Some faces were veiled in polite amusement. Others, like our mother, Margaret, directly beside Sophie on the stage, were openly sneering, a triumphant smirk twisting her lips. So, in the spirit of generosity, of family, and perhaps a touch of charity, Sophie paused, letting the dramatic tension build, her gaze unwavering, fixed on my mortified face. We thought, why not offer them up a package deal, if you will? A mother and son, ready for a new beginning. Perhaps a new patron, someone to truly appreciate their unique qualities. The words struck me like physical blows. My sister, my own flesh and blood, was auctioning me, auctioning Liam. The concept was so monstrous, so utterly depraved, that, for a moment, my mind refused to process it. My visions swam, the dazzling chandeliers above blurring into a kaleidoscope of cruel lights. "Starting bid," Sophie declared, her voice rising to a crescendo. $100. For a lifetime of interesting experiences. Interesting. A wave of laughter, louder, more brazen than before, erupted. It was a cacophony of snide amusement, a symphony of derision that echoed off the high ceilings of the ballroom. I could feel Liam trembling beside me, his grip on my hand tightening, his small face crumpling. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the jeers, tears welling in his eyes. What's happening? My blood ran cold. The humiliation was unbearable for myself. But for Liam, for my son, it was a wound that would fester. This wasn't just about Sophie's callousness anymore. It was about the indelible mark this moment would leave on his young, impressionable mind. I wanted to scream, to run, to shield him from the cruel reality that his own aunt was making a mockery of our very existence, parading our poverty and single-parent status like a grotesque sideshow. My carefully constructed facade of dignity, the one I wore like armor against the world's judgments, shattered into a million pieces. Anyone willing to take on this unique responsibility, Sophie egged them on, her voice laced with feigned eagerness, her eyes still locked on me, enjoying my agony. Margaret clapped. A slow, deliberate sound, her smile wide and predatory. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by Liam's stifled sobs. No one raised a hand. Of course, no one would. It was a cruel joke, designed to highlight our worthlessness, our utter lack of value in their glittering, superficial world. Then, just as the silence stretched, thick and suffocating, just as the last vestiges of hope for any human decency within this gilded cage evaporated, a ripple went through the crowd. It wasn't a laugh this time, but a collective intake of breath, a sudden, startled murmur. My eyes, swimming with unshed tears, instinctively followed the shift in their gaze. And there, near the back, shrouded partially in shadow, a figure I didn't recognize, a tall man, impeccably dressed, slowly, deliberately, raised his hand. His movement was almost imperceptible, a quiet defiance in a room full of noise. Yet it drew every eye, every stunned breath. My sister's triumphant smile faltered, her jaw going slack. My mother's predatory glee vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered shock. The laughter died, replaced by an astonished silence. The man's hand remained raised, steady and unwavering, a silent challenge in the face of their cruelty. And in that instant, everything shifted. The collective gasp that followed the stranger's raised hand reverberated through the ballroom, a wave of stunned silence crashing against the previous tide of cruel laughter. My eyes, still stinging with unshed tears, were glued to him, my mind struggling to reconcile the impossible. Was this another layer to Sophie's twisted joke? Was he an accomplice? An actor hired to deepen my humiliation? But the shock on Sophie's face, the utter disbelief contorting Margaret's usually composed features, told me otherwise. This was not part of their script. This was real. Liam, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stopped trembling. He looked up at me, his small face still wet with tears, a flicker of bewildered curiosity replacing the fear in his eyes. The room, moments before a cacophony of mirth, was now so quiet I could hear the faint strains of classical music from the distant orchestra, a jarringly elegant soundtrack to this grotesque farce. The man began to walk, slowly, deliberately, cutting a path through the frozen guests. He was tall, with broad shoulders, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit that spoke of quiet wealth rather than ostentatious display. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his face, though unfamiliar, held an air of profound calm, almost a gentle resolve. He wasn't looking at Sophie or Margaret. His gaze was fixed on Liam and me. It was a gaze that held no judgment, no pity, only a quiet intensity that sent a shiver. Not of fear, but of an unfamiliar hope. Down my spine, though, my relationship with Sophie had always been a battlefield, a relentless competition orchestrated and fueled by our mother, Margaret, from childhood. Sophie was the golden child, the effortlessly beautiful, academically brilliant, socially charming one. I was the quiet one, the one who preferred books to parties, art to gossip. Margaret, a woman obsessed with appearances and social climbing, had seen Sophie as her masterpiece, her ticket to the upper echelons of society. I, on the other hand, was a constant disappointment, a smudge on her polished facade. "Why can't you be more like your sister, Emily?" was a refrain as familiar as my own name. Every achievement of mine was minimized, every stumble magnified. The chasm between us widened irrevocably when I became pregnant with Liam. His father, a kind but ultimately unreliable artist I had met in college, had disappeared shortly after the news. I was young, terrified, and utterly alone. When I told my mother, her reaction was not one of support, but of utter fury and shame. "You've ruined everything, Emily!" she had shrieked, her face contorted with disgust. A single mother. What will people say Sophie's reputation? Our family's standing? You've soiled it all. Sophie, ever her mother's echo, had simply looked at me with cold disdain, as if I had contracted some contagious disease. From that day forward, I was exiled, not physically, but emotionally. From their inner circle, they tolerated my presence at family gatherings, but only as a living embodiment of their disappointment, a cautionary tale. I remember one Christmas, Liam's first, when I dared to bring him to their lavish family dinner. Sophie, already engaged to a wealthy businessman, had flaunted her diamond ring, while Margaret regaled everyone with tales of Sophie's grand wedding plans. Liam, a tiny bundle in my arms, had gurgled contentedly. But their eyes, when they glanced our way, held only a thinly veiled contempt. "It's a shame, isn't it, Emily?" Sophie had purred, loud enough for others to hear. "That some people just can't seem to make good decisions in life. Poor Liam, starting off with such a disadvantage." I had excused myself quickly, holding Liam close, the festive cheer of the room turning into a suffocating weight. Their cruelty was never overtly violent, but insidious, psychological warfare, slowly eroding my self-worth. I had worked tirelessly, balancing 2 part-time jobs while Liam was in daycare, then finding a remote editing job that allowed me to be home with him. Every penny was stretched, every sacrifice made for his well-being. My apartment, though small, was filled with his drawings and laughter. I had built a life for us, a quiet, dignified existence away from their judgment. Or so I thought. This wedding, I had told myself, was a necessary evil, a brief dipping back into the shark-infested waters of my family obligations. I had come, dressed in the best dress I could afford, my head held high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. But Sophie's auction had shattered that fragile shield. It was a public declaration of my worthlessness, a calculated move to strip me of every last shred of pride. Now. As the stranger continued his measured walk towards us, the air thickened with unspoken questions. Sophie, still frozen on the stage, finally found her voice, a strained, uncertain sound. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, trying to inject her usual imperiousness, but it wavered, betraying her confusion. "Is there something you require?" The man didn't answer her directly. He reached us, stopping a few feet away. His eyes, a startling shade of intelligent blue, met mine. They held a depth, a quiet understanding that was unsettling in its directness. Then he slowly lowered his raised hand, not in defeat, but in a gesture that felt almost protective. He looked down at Liam, who was now peeking out from behind my leg, his thumb in his mouth. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the man's lips. "I believe," he said, his voice deep and resonant, cutting through the silence of the ballroom with a quiet authority that commanded attention. "I just made a bid." He then turned his gaze, not to Sophie, but directly to Margaret, who was now openly gaping. "And I intend to see it through." The implication hung in the air, a daring challenge to their carefully constructed mockery. Sophie's face flushed a deep crimson, and Margaret's jaw tightened. They had expected silence, scorn, perhaps even more laughter. They had not expected a buyer, and certainly not one who looked so utterly unperturbed, so utterly in control. The tension in the room, which had been a suffocating weight of humiliation for me, now transformed into something else entirely, a palpable sense of shock, an uncomfortable curiosity, and, for Sophie and Margaret, a dawning realization that their cruel prank had just spectacularly backfired. My heart, which had been pounding with terror, now hammered with a different kind of adrenaline, a nascent, dangerous hope. The ballroom remained in a stunned silence, a heavy, expectant quiet that stretched taut, threatening to snap. Every eye in the room, from the socialites bedecked in designer gowns to the catering staff frozen in their tracks, was fixated on the man who had dared to disrupt Sophie's carefully orchestrated humiliation. Sophie, usually so quick-witted and sharp-tongued, seemed to have been struck dumb. Her jaw was still slack, her perfect bridal smile replaced by a look of bewildered fury. Margaret, ever the more pragmatic of the two, recovered first, her eyes narrowing as she stepped forward, her voice a low, dangerous hiss. "What exactly do you mean?" Sir Margaret demanded, her aristocratic tone laced with a venomous edge. "This is a private family event, and my daughter was merely making a light-hearted jest. There is no actual auction taking place." She tried to dismiss him with a dismissive wave of her hand, but her gaze was furtive, darting between the stranger and the silent, watchful crowd. She knew, as did Sophie, that the jest had gone too far, its cruelty exposed by this man's unexpected intervention. The stranger's gaze, however, remained fixed on Margaret, unwavering and calmly authoritative. "On the contrary, Madame," he replied, his voice still measured, "your daughter publicly announced an auction, set a starting bid, and solicited participants. I responded to that solicitation, in the eyes of any reasonable person, and indeed, likely in the eyes of the law, a contractual offer was made, and I accepted it." He paused, letting his words hang in the air, weighted with an undeniable truth. "Unless, of course, you admit that this entire spectacle was a malicious attempt to publicly humiliate a member of your family, which, I assure you, would be a far more damaging admission than simply honoring a valid bid." A collective murmur rippled through the guests. Malicious humiliation. The words hung in the air, undeniable and stark. The veil of jest had been ripped away, exposing the ugly truth beneath. Faces that had held amusement now shifted to discomfort, some even to outright disapproval. I saw a few guests exchange uncomfortable glances, their polite smiles faltering. The atmosphere had changed. Sophie and Margaret were no longer the witty entertainers. They were the perpetrators of a public cruelty, caught red-handed. Sophie, regaining some semblance of her composure, finally spoke, her voice shrill with indignation. "This is outrageous. You can't just walk in here and claim to buy my sister. It's insane." The man turned his gaze to Sophie, his expression unreadable. "No." "What's insane? Miss Carter is using your wedding as a platform to degrade your own family members, especially in front of a child. My intent is merely to uphold the public agreement you so enthusiastically initiated." He gestured subtly towards Liam, who was still clinging to my leg, his innocent eyes wide, trying to comprehend the escalating drama. The man's focus on Liam felt like a shield, protecting my son from the venomous words being flung around. My heart was a chaotic drumbeat in my chest. This stranger, this complete unknown, was defending us. He was dismantling their carefully constructed narrative of charity and exposing their cruelty, all with a quiet dignity that left them floundering. But a terrifying question also gnawed at me. What did he mean? Uphold the public agreement. What did he intend to do? Was I truly about to be bought? The idea was absurd, terrifying, and yet, in the face of their open malice, also strangely protective. "Who are you?" Margaret demanded, her voice rising, losing its aristocratic composure. "You don't belong here." The man finally offered a faint, almost sardonic smile. "My apologies," he said. a touch of dry humor in his tone. "My name is Arthur Hayes, and I assure you, Madam, I am precisely where I need to be." The name, Arthur Hayes, seemed to hang in the air, instantly recognizable to some of the more influential guests. A few whispers started to spread. Hushed and astonished, I didn't know the name, but the reactions of those around me suggested it held significant weight. Suddenly, Sophie's new husband, David, a man I'd always found blandly polite, finally stirred from his stunned silence on the stage. He moved to Sophie's side, placing a hand on her arm, his face pale. "Sophie, darling, perhaps we should address this later. It's our wedding day." His voice was placating, but his eyes held a desperate plea, a clear indication that this unexpected turn of events was jeopardizing his carefully curated image of a perfect wedding. "Address what?" Sophie shrieked, pulling away from him. "This man is delusional. He thinks he can just take Emily and her son. This is madness." Arthur Hayes, however, ignored their theatrics. He turned back to me, his blue eyes softening. "Emily, is it?" he asked, his voice gentle. "And Liam?" He knelt down slowly, bringing himself to Liam's eye level. "Liam, you look like a very brave young man." Liam, surprised by the direct address and the man's kind demeanor, cautiously extended a finger, touching the fabric of Arthur's expensive suit. "Are you a knight?" he whispered, his tears forgotten for a moment. A genuine smile, warm and surprisingly tender, touched Arthur's lips. Something like that. "Perhaps," he said, his eyes twinkling. "And knights, you see, help those in need." He then stood up, his gaze returning to mine, firm and resolute. "Emily, I understand this is unconventional, even alarming, but I could not stand by and watch this public cruelty. My offer is genuine. I want to offer you and Liam a way out of this, situation. A new beginning, far away from this kind of malice." His words, meant to be reassuring, paradoxically deepened my conflict. A way out. A new beginning. The very idea was intoxicating, a siren song promising escape from years of emotional abuse. But at what cost? Was I, in my desperation, about to trade one form of humiliation for another to be rescued by a stranger, felt dangerously close to the very thing Sophie had accused me of being a project. A charity case, my pride, shattered as it was, still clung to a stubborn shred of independence. Who was this man, and what did he truly want? Was he a white knight, or something far more complicated, the idea of accepting his help? Of publicly acknowledging my vulnerability and need felt like another profound betrayal of my own strength, a capitulation to their narrative of my helplessness. But then I looked at Liam, his small face still confused, his thumb still in his mouth. My pride was one thing, but his well-being was everything. This unexpected intervention, though shrouded in mystery, had undeniably shifted the balance of power. The humiliation was still searing, but now, mixed with it, was a strange, unsettling blend of fear, curiosity, and a fragile, almost forbidden hope. The sudden calm in Arthur Hayes's voice, the genuine concern in his eyes when he spoke to Liam, felt like a balm on my raw, exposed soul. But his offer, though delivered with such kindness, still twisted a knot of dread in my stomach. A way out. A new beginning. It sounded like a fairy tale, but my life had taught me that fairy tales were often thinly veiled traps. My pride, though battered, was not yet broken. Years of fighting for my independence, for a life where I didn't owe anyone anything, had forged an unyielding core within me. To accept such a monumental offer from a complete stranger felt like a surrender, a public admission of the very helplessness Sophie and Margaret had always accused me of. A way out, Margaret scoffed, her voice regaining its cutting edge as she finally found her footing. "And what, pray tell, do you expect in return, Mr. Hayes? Do you think Emily and her son are some kind of charity project you can simply buy to assuage your conscience? This isn't some Dickensian novel, sir. My daughter is not for sale, nor is her child." Her eyes, sharp as obsidian, fixed on me. "Unless, of course, Emily put you up to this, did you? Dear orchestrated a grand scene to try and embarrass us, your own family?" The accusation, though ridiculous, stung. It was a classic Margaret move: deflect, accuse, and turn the victim into the perpetrator. Sophie, seeing her mother's renewed aggression, quickly chimed in, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Oh, Emily, you're always so dramatic. First, you shame us by showing up like that. And now this bizarre stunt? Honestly, can't you ever just be normal?" My hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. The shame returned. A warm, searing flush that crept up my neck. Their words, like poisoned darts, found their mark, aiming for the last vestiges of my self-respect. But then, I felt Liam's small hand slip into mine, his fingers tightly entwined with mine. A silent anchor. He was looking up at me, his eyes wide, still processing the chaos unfolding around him. It wasn't about me anymore. Me. It was about him, about protecting his innocence from this relentless barrage of negativity. My pride might be wounded, but his well-being was paramount. Arthur Hayes remained unfazed by their renewed attack. He met Margaret's accusatory gaze with a calm, almost pitying expression. "Madam, your attempts to twist the narrative are as transparent as they are desperate. I assure you, Miss Carter had no prior knowledge of my presence, nor my intentions. My intervention was purely in response to the egregious display of cruelty I witnessed." He paused, his voice deepening with quiet authority. "As for what I expect in return, I expect nothing, only to provide an opportunity for a fresh start, far from an environment where such public displays of disdain are considered acceptable entertainment." He then turned back to me, his blue eyes holding a profound understanding. "Emily," he said, his voice gentle but firm enough to cut through the lingering tension, "I understand your hesitation. Your dignity is clear, even in this deplorable situation, and I would never suggest that you are a charity case. What I am offering is a hand up, not a handout, an opportunity to redefine your circumstances, on your own terms, a chance to leave this behind, with no strings attached, no obligations to me." His words struck a chord deep within me. No strings attached. It sounded too good to be true. A promise that felt utterly alien after years of conditional affection and veiled demands from my family. But his gaze was unwavering, sincere. He seemed to understand the very core of my fear, the loss of autonomy. For the first time since this nightmare began, a tiny, fragile tendril of trust began to unfurl in my chest. He wasn't demanding anything. He was offering... "This is preposterous," Sophie shrieked, finally breaking free of David's grasp and rushing down from the stage, her bridal gown billowing around her like an enraged white cloud. He's clearly some kind of opportunist. Or worse, Emily. Don't be a fool. You don't know this man. She tried to grab my arm, her manicured fingers digging into my skin. Before I could react, Arthur subtly stepped between us, his body language a silent barrier, his presence radiating a quiet authority that instantly made Sophie flinch back. "I believe," he said, his voice now colder, less patient, "that my intentions are far more honorable than your own. Miss Carter, I offered a bid, and I intend to honor it. If you wish to dispute the validity of your own public pronouncements, we can certainly take this discussion elsewhere. Perhaps with legal counsel present?" The mention of legal counsel had a noticeable effect. Margaret's face paled, and Sophie, for once, seemed to lose her defiant spark. The whispers among the guests grew louder, no longer just curious, but speculative. I overheard snippets. Arthur Hayes, is he the Arthur Hayes, the tech billionaire, the philanthropist? But why here? Why them? The realization dawned on me, this man wasn't just wealthy, he was powerful. His presence here, his willingness to intervene, carried a weight I hadn't comprehended. My mind raced. To accept his offer would be to definitively break free from Sophie and Margaret. To sever the toxic ties that had bound me for so long, it would mean escaping this endless cycle of humiliation and disappointment. It would mean a chance, a real chance, for Liam and me to build a truly peaceful life. But it also meant stepping into the unknown, trusting a stranger with the fragile hope I held for our future. I looked at Liam, who, shielded by Arthur's presence and seemingly sensing the shift in the atmosphere, was now looking up at Arthur with wide-eyed admiration. His little fingers still clutched mine, but a brave little smile was starting to form on his face. He wasn't scared anymore. He was curious, hopeful. He saw a knight, and suddenly, my pride felt less important than my son's newfound sense of safety, his dawning belief in the possibility of good in the world. My gaze flickered between Sophie's furious, defeated face, Margaret's calculating, cornered expression, and then back to Arthur Hayes's calm, expectant eyes. There was no going back. The line had been drawn. If I stayed, their cruelty would only intensify, fueled by this public defiance. If I left with him, it would be a leap of faith, yes, but a leap towards something potentially better, something free. Taking a deep breath, a breath that felt like the first truly free breath I had taken in years. I met Arthur's gaze. My voice, though a little shaky, was clear, firm. "Mr. Hayes," I began, the words feeling both terrifying and exhilarating. "What exactly does your offer entail?" My question, rather than a refusal, was an acknowledgement. A subtle shift from passive victim to active participant. It was a silent agreement to explore the impossible. Sophie let out a choked gasp of disbelief, and Margaret's eyes widened in horror. Arthur, however, offered a small, knowing smile, a flicker of triumph in his intelligent blue eyes. The ball was now in his court, and the entire ballroom held its breath, waiting for the terms of this most unconventional of deals. The air crackled with a new kind of tension, not just humiliation, but a profound sense of anticipation, and, for me, a hesitant but undeniable surge of hope. Arthur Hayes's smile deepened, a subtle acknowledgement of my implicit acceptance, a silent victory in the face of Sophie and Margaret's open horror. "My offer, Emily," he began, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the stunned silence of the ballroom, "is quite straightforward. I own a substantial property in the Hamptons, a secluded estate with ample space, currently managed by a small, discreet staff. It's far from the public eye, a place where you and Liam can truly find peace and privacy." He paused, letting the implications sink in, his gaze steady on mine. "You would have a dedicated wing, completely private, with all amenities, full financial support, meaning no more balancing multiple jobs, no more worrying about rent or bills. Liam would have access to the best schools, and any resources he needs for his development and well-being. There would be no expectation of work from you, no domestic duties, no social obligations unless you choose them. Your time would be entirely your own, to pursue whatever passions you desire, to simply be—" My breath hitched. It sounded like an impossible dream, a fairy tale beyond anything I had ever dared to imagine. Freedom from financial strain, from the constant grind, from the pervasive judgment of my family. It was a life I had only ever glimpsed in magazines, never truly believed was within reach. But the old fears, the deeply ingrained skepticism, immediately resurfaced, no strings attached. It was too generous, too perfect, There had to be a catch. Sophie, finding her voice, let out a choked sound of disbelief. You're offering her a life of luxury? For what? What do you want from her? Her voice was laced with a desperate envy, a barely contained fury that her carefully constructed image of my perpetual struggle was being so spectacularly demolished. Margaret. Her face pale, looked like she might faint. The whispers among the guests had escalated into audible murmurs, a mixture of astonishment and scandalized fascination. Arthur's gaze sharpened as he turned to Sophie, his voice losing its gentle edge. What I want, Miss Carter, is to see a grave injustice rectified. I want to see a mother and child spared from the kind of emotional abuse I have just witnessed. My reasons are my own, and they are entirely honorable. Unlike your rather public display. My intentions are not for show or for personal gain. He then turned back to me, his expression softening once more. And as for what I want from you? Emily, nothing, absolutely nothing. Your presence, your well-being, and Liam's happiness would be payment enough. You would be free to come and go as you please. If, after a period of time, you decide it's not for you, or if you find a different path, you are free to leave, with a substantial financial gift to ensure your continued independence. The finality of his words, the unwavering conviction in his tone, chipped away at my remaining defenses. A substantial financial gift to leave. This wasn't a gilded cage. It was an exit strategy, a profound act of genuine generosity. He wasn't just offering rescue, he was offering autonomy, the very thing I cherished most. It was an unprecedented act of altruism. So utterly divorced from the transactional nature of my family's world that it was almost incomprehensible. Liam, who had been listening intently, his head tilted, tugged on my hand. "Mommy," he whispered, his eyes wide and shining. "Can we really go with the night?" His innocent plea, his unreserved trust in this stranger, was the final push. My son saw hope, a promise of safety and happiness. Could I deny him that? Simply because my own past had conditioned me to expect betrayal. My eyes swept over the faces of Sophie and Margaret. Their expressions were a mixture of abject defeat and simmering rage. Their power over me, their ability to inflict pain, was visibly slipping away, replaced by their own humiliation. This was my chance, not just for a new life, but to finally, definitively, break free from their toxic grip, to choose dignity over degradation, hope over despair. "This is insane, Emily!" Sophie shrieked, her voice cracking, her perfect bridal facade finally crumbling. "You can't just abandon your family. You can't just run off with some stranger." "My family," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly strong, a newfound clarity ringing in my ears. I looked directly at Sophie, then at Margaret, and for the first time, their words held no power over me. My family is the one that just tried to auction me and my son off like chattel. My family is the one that has systematically belittled and shamed me for years. If this is family, then I want no part of it. A stunned silence fell once more, deeper and more profound than any before. My words, delivered without anger but with quiet conviction, seemed to land with the force of a physical blow. Sophie recoiled as if slapped, as if... Margaret's eyes darted away, unable to meet my gaze. The guests, who had been murmuring, were now completely silent, absorbing the raw, unfiltered truth of my statement. I turned back to Arthur, his patient blue eyes waiting. The choice was clear. It was terrifying. Yes, but also undeniably right. This wasn't about being bought, it was about being saved. Not from poverty, but from the relentless emotional violence that had defined my life. "Mr. Hayes," I said, my voice steady, my gaze meeting his with a newfound resolve. I accept your offer." A collective gasp went through the room. Sophie let out a strangled cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock and fury. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her face a mask of horror, but I barely registered them. My focus was entirely on Arthur, on Liam, and on the terrifying, exhilarating precipice of a new beginning. Arthur offered me a small, gentle smile, a warmth radiating from him that banished the lingering chill of the ballroom's cold indifference. "Excellent," he said, his voice quiet, almost conspiratorial. He didn't make a grand show of it. No triumphant declaration. Instead, he simply extended a hand towards Liam. "Shall we?" Young man Liam, his face beaming, reached out and confidently placed his small hand in Arthur's much larger one. Arthur then turned to me, his hand still extended towards Liam, implicitly inviting me to join them. It wasn't a demand, but an invitation, a promise of shared journey, without hesitation. I reached out and clasped his arm, letting him guide Liam and me away from the frozen tableau of the wedding, away from the shocked gasps and horrified stares of my family and their society. As we walked, a quiet dignity replacing the earlier humiliation, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. The weight of their judgment, the suffocating presence of their malice, was finally lifting. My sister had auctioned me and my son, and a stranger had raised his hand. And in that simple act, a new life, utterly unimaginable moments before, had begun. The elegant hum of the limousine's engine was the only sound for a long time after we exited the grand ballroom, leaving behind the stunned silence and the flickering lights of what had once been Sophie's perfect wedding. Liam, nestled securely between Arthur and me in the plush leather seats, had stopped crying. His earlier bewilderment had transformed into wide-eyed wonder, his small face pressed against the window, watching the blur of the city lights outside. He kept glancing up at Arthur, a silent, reverent admiration in his gaze, as if the night from his innocent question had truly materialized to whisk us away. I, too, felt a profound sense of unreality, as if I had stepped out of a suffocating nightmare and into a dream. The air in the car was cool, clean, devoid of the stale malice that had clung to the ballroom like a shroud. As we sped away, leaving the glittering facade of their world behind, the full weight of what had just happened began to settle. I had not merely left a party, I had severed ties, burned bridges, and, in a single defiant act, reclaimed my life. The shame, which had been a constant companion for years, began to dissipate, replaced by a liberating sense of defiance. The anger, simmering beneath the surface for so long, softened into a quiet satisfaction. Justice, in its most unexpected and public form, had been served. Sophie and Margaret, trapped in their gilded cage of expectations and appearances, were left to face the horrified whispers and judging stares of their own peers, caught in the very public humiliation they had intended for me. The thought brought a strange, bittersweet relief. The journey to the Hamptons felt like crossing a threshold, from one life to an entirely different one. We arrived at a sprawling estate, hidden behind a discreet gate and a long tree-lined driveway. The house was magnificent, not ostentatious but grand in its understated elegance, bathed in the soft glow of interior lights. A small team of impeccably dressed staff greeted us, their faces kind and welcoming, their movements efficient and respectful. There were no invasive questions, no curious stares, just quiet professionalism. They led us to a private wing of the house, a self-contained apartment with multiple bedrooms, a living area, and even a small, sunlit playroom for Liam. Every detail had been considered: a fully stocked kitchen, clothes in our sizes laid out in the closets, even a selection of Liam's favorite children's books and a new toy train set. Arthur had clearly made arrangements with remarkable speed and foresight. The first few days were a blur of adjustment. Liam, initially shy, quickly embraced his new surroundings. He spent hours exploring the sprawling gardens, playing with the gentle golden retriever belonging to the estate manager, and delighting in the sheer space and freedom. For me, the silence was the most striking thing. No more the constant hum of city traffic, no more the gnawing anxiety of bills, no more the unspoken judgment lurking in every interaction with my family. It was a deep, pervasive quiet that allowed my frayed nerves to slowly unwind. I spent my days reading, something I hadn't truly enjoyed since before Liam was born. My mind finally free to wander beyond the immediate concerns of survival. I rediscovered my love for sketching, simple charcoal drawings that had always been my quiet refuge, now pursued without guilt or interruption. Arthur was a presence, but never an intrusive one, as though he lived in another part of the estate, often immersed in his work, but he would join us for occasional dinners. He never pressed me for details of my past, never offered unsolicited advice, and never once alluded to the debt of his generosity. Our conversations were surprisingly natural, ranging from current events to literature, from the nuances of business to the simple joys of Liam's latest discovery. He was exceptionally intelligent, perceptive, and possessed a dry wit that often made me laugh, a sound I realized I hadn't truly let loose in years. He wasn't a romantic figure, nor did he attempt to be. He was, instead, a profound catalyst, a quiet guardian, and an unexpected friend. His presence allowed me to breathe, to heal, to slowly, carefully reconstruct my sense of self. Not as Sophie's ridiculed sister, nor Margaret's disappointment, but as Emily Carter, a woman finding her own footing. I had braced myself for some form of retaliation from Sophie and Margaret, some desperate attempt to regain control or salvage their reputation. The staff informed me that there had been a flurry of calls, angry and demanding at first, then increasingly desperate and pleading. Arthur had intercepted them all, calmly and firmly reiterating that Emily and Liam were now under his protection and desired no contact. After a few weeks, the calls ceased. The silence from their end was a different kind of freedom, a final confirmation that their hold over me was truly broken. They had lost not just control, but also the public narrative, their cruelty exposed to their own social circle. The justice of it, while not vengeful, was undeniable. Months turned into a year, and then another. Liam thrived. He excelled in his new school, his natural curiosity nurtured by dedicated teachers and abundant resources. He was a happy, well-adjusted child, his early trauma fading into a distant, incomprehensible memory, replaced by the joyful experiences of a secure and loving environment. I watched him grow, free from the shadows of our past, and felt a profound, enduring gratitude for the man who had made it all possible. I began to explore opportunities, not out of necessity, but out of a newfound sense of purpose. I enrolled in online courses in art history, deepening my knowledge and allowing my passion to flourish. I started volunteering at a local art gallery, finding immense satisfaction in being part of a community that valued beauty and creativity. Arthur, ever supportive, provided gentle encouragement, never pushing, always believing in my capacity to define my own path. My relationship with Arthur deepened into a quiet, unwavering bond of mutual respect. He was more than a benefactor. He was the person who, in my darkest hour, saw not my humiliation, but my inherent worth. He had offered me not just money or shelter, but the space and security to heal and rediscover myself. He had been the catalyst for a liberation I never knew was possible. One evening, as Liam was asleep and Arthur and I sat on the veranda, watching the stars pepper the clear Hampton sky, I finally asked him, "Arthur, why did you do it? Why us?" He looked at me, his blue eyes reflecting the distant starlight. "Emily," he said softly, "I have seen a great deal of cruelty in my life, and a great deal of kindness. What your sister and mother did, it was beyond the pale, and what I saw in you, even in that moment of profound pain, was a quiet dignity, a fierce love for your son, and a spirit that refused to be completely broken. Some things, Emily, cannot be tolerated. And sometimes, one must simply act. He paused, a faint smile touching his lips. Besides, Liam called me a knight. A man has to live up to his reputation. Doesn't he? I smiled. A genuine, heartfelt smile that reached my eyes. I knew then that his intentions were truly as pure as they had seemed. He hadn't bought me or Liam. He had simply, profoundly, given us the freedom to be ourselves, to build a future unburdened by the past. My sister had auctioned me and my son, and a stranger had raised his hand. And because he did, our story, once steeped in humiliation, had blossomed into one of unexpected grace, quiet strength, and boundless new beginnings. The path ahead was mine to choose, and for the first time in my life, it stretched out, clear and full of possibilities.